It's a really important concept in economics, so you need to be able to define opportunity cost, you need to apply it to an example from the case study, you need to be able to define production possibility curve or PPC, you need to be able to draw it to show certain scenarios, but then you also need to be able to relate opportunity cost to a PPC to show opportunity cost on a PPC. So the definition of opportunity cost of the next best alternative, which is foregone, will get you 2 marks in the exam. So for example, imagine you had 50p to spend and you have a choice of 2 things. You can either purchase Cherry Coke or you can purchase a Mars bar. Now personally, I would go for the Cherry Coke. I feel like it would bring me more benefits in my life. But because I only have 150p to spend, by purchasing the Cherry Coke, I'm spending that 50p, but I'm also giving up the opportunity to have the Mars bar, which is why it's called opportunity cost. It's a cost to you because you're giving up that opportunity. So whatever benefits that would have come from that Mars bar, such as the chocolatey full feeling that you get from it, I've given up that chance. Now I'm okay with that concept because the Cherry Coke I've decided is better for me personally, but this concept is looking at the next best alternative. So not just looking at how much things cost you in terms of, well, it cost me 50p to purchase, but what you gave up, the opportunity that you gave up in order to have the choice that you made. So next onto production possibility curve. So if I just skip ahead to the definition, it's the maximum quantity of 2 products, the output of 2 products that can be produced given current resources in the state of technology. It's also known as the production possibility frontier. You might read that in some textbooks. They just mean the same thing. Make sure you learn this definition because sometimes the examiners like to catch you out with this one because students revise the diagram and then they don't revise the definition. But if we go back to this example is actually taken from the textbook, and you've got TVs along one axis and cars along the other axis, and here we've got an economy that can produce either 1,000 cars or 2,000 TVs, or they can produce somewhere in between those. So that's why you've got this line which we call the production possibility curve, the frontier. This is the maximum output that you could produce. So you could actually be choosing any point within this triangle or on the line of the triangle. And anywhere on the line of the triangle, anywhere at all, you know, you're not making a judgment whether this point up here would be better than this point down here. It can be any point up at all would be productively efficient, which basically means that you're using all of your resources to produce the maximum output possible. So therefore, within the triangle is going to be what we call inefficient, and it's inefficient because you can produce more with the resources that you have. So it means that there must be some wastage going on. And then out here in red is the unobtainable. So you can't produce that there. It'd be nice if you could, but you can't because you don't have enough resources. So you'd need some form of growth to get out there, or some technological advancement to be able to produce out there. Okay, so how do we relate opportunity costs to the PPC? Well, you've got to show, first of all, you've got to set up some kind of movement going on your diagram. So I've done point 1 to point 2, but you could just be moving from point 2 to point 1. It doesn't really matter which way, if you're going down the slope or up the slope. But if I move from point 1 to 2, it means that I'm going to get more of whatever's on this axis. So in this case, it's TV. So I get that lovely gain down here. But the opportunity cost is what I gave up to get that gain. So here it is fewer cars that we can produce now because I've moved the resources towards producing TVs. So the opportunity cost in this case is C1 minus C2, that just whatever that quantity is. It looks about 350 to me, but you know, we don't need to do it exactly, but that's the opportunity cost. So you'd want to illustrate that on the diagram round about there, or the other way around if you're going from 2 to 1. Before I was talking about unobtainable, so this diagram here represents a movement upwards. So we've got some technological advance going on here. I think in the case study here it is. So they've developed more advanced robots to carry out the production. Okay, so you're able to produce more cars then. So we've got this movement, but we can still produce the same number of TVs. So there hasn't been technological advancement in that sense. For TVs. And then economic growth, it's a macro definition here, so it's a change in the productive potential of an economy, so it should be a positive change. And your productive potential is just the maximum output that you're capable of producing. So this relates back to PPCs because the maximum output, your productive potential, is basically just that line. So here, I've just obviously got a student to give me an example of two products. So we've got this very unrealistic economy where you just produce balls and iPhones. But here we've got equal growth. So there's been some technological advance, or you've got maybe more labour available for some reason, so you can produce more balls and iPhones. Here you've got just advance in just balls, and here you've got just advance in iPhones, so you can produce more of those but the same number of balls. Okay, all of these diagrams on the top here represent potential growth. So yeah, potentially we can produce more, but until you put these little crosses on and label these points, you don't have actual growth. So if we move from this point to this point, we have actual growth. Say we were on here and we moved out, again, actual growth. Here, again, actual growth, but just very simple growth because we're just going from being very inefficient to efficient, productively efficient. So that's still growth. Okay, some people wonder why the PPC is curved, usually when we draw it on a diagram and not straight, and this is because in reality it's most likely to be curved. So what I've done is put a straight line and a curved line on this diagram, and you can see there's a big gap there just at the extremes of, we've got sugar production and biofuel. This was from a past paper. So, you know, why do we have that gap there at the extremes? And it's because, say you were producing here in the middle and you wanted to move some of your production up here. So what you'd have to do is move some of your resources, so your machinery, your people. And first of all, what you're going to do to make life a little bit easier for yourself, you're going to move any resource that is quite easy to move. So your most flexible workers, your most flexible machinery. But as you get to the extremes, you're running out of kind of flexible machinery and flexible workers to move. So you have to move these like really inefficient resources that actually they're not so good at kind of switching from biofuel to producing sugar. So that's why you get this basically this curved shape happening, because it's not a one-to-one switch. You can't just kind of click your fingers and before you were producing biofuel and now you're producing sugar. So we get this basically it's an opportunity cost there. Okay, so you might think, well, production possibility curves, very interesting, but not very realistic. And they're not really, because it's an economy producing two products, so very unrealistic. But it illustrates this concept of this choice that you've got to make, and you can actually make them a little bit more realistic by labelling one of your axes capital goods, so products used to make other goods, and consumer goods, goods intended for direct consumption. And there was actually quite a famous speech about this from Nazi Germany, actually, and it was either Goebbels or Göring, but you can kind of look it up, and he talks about guns and butter, guns meaning capital goods and butter meaning consumer goods, and his theory was that you should invest in capital goods because consumer goods make you fat, as in butter makes you fat, but whatever. So this would make it a more realistic version of our economy. And that's all you need to know for those areas. So definition of opportunity costs, apply it to the case study, definition of PPC, be able to apply it to the case study, so you can label your axes with whatever it is in the case study. So biofuel and sugar was 1 year, and use it to show the concept of scarcity. So, you know, you can only produce up to the PPC, you can't produce beyond that, so the resources are scarce, they can only produce a certain amount of output. You can choose a point on the line or within the line, and you've got your opportunity cost as well on there, which you need to show movement and the amount that you've given up to gain that movement.